Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. It is the Tuesday edition here of Point of View, and we're going to spend a little bit of time in this first half hour here looking at a local issue, something that's been happening in the Carroll ISD, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But even if you don't happen to live in that part of this metroplex or don't even live in the state of Texas, I think you're going to benefit from this, because one of the concerns we've expressed so often here on Point of View is the fact that oftentimes there's an attempt to indoctrinate students in ideas and values that we would disagree with, and that is certainly what we're going to be talking about when we talk about this cultural competence plan, and something that actually has led to a suit to try to get that information out. So in studio with me today, I'm just privileged to have somebody who's been on the program with us before, Tim O'Hare, part of the law offices of Tim O'Hare, and also serves as the treasurer of the Republican Party of the state of Texas, member of First Baptist Church in Grapevine, individual that we've been following, was the Republican chairman of Tarrant County, and we've known him for many years, and it's just great to have you in studio today.
It's great to be here, Kerby, and appreciate all that you do and all your group does. Very important work.
I think we go back a long way. I was thinking the first time I interviewed you, that was 3 studios ago. So that is going back a few years.
Farmers Branch days, when either I was on the city council or mayor.
Yeah, I remember all of that. Okay, let's try to explain people what is going on there, because there have been some concerns from parents and students about how this plan that is being put forth could be affecting religious students, people with Christian values. And so kind of give us an update what the plan is and some of the actions you've had to take.
Sure. So what's going on? Carroll ISD is the school district that serves South Lake, Texas.
Yes.
And for folks around here, they know that South Lake is a very affluent community. What they may not know is South Lake is a very conservative community. So it is a large Christian conservative community that is always the reddest part of Tarrant County. And so the fact that they're doing this here is really pretty stunning, because it flies in the face of what most people that live in this community believe. Carroll ISD touches on Grapevine, Keller, South Lake, but covers most South Lake. So why I think an important thing to ask is, why does it matter what's going on in this little bitty community, in this little bitty school district? And here's why. All across the state of Texas, people know that Carroll ISD is the creme de la creme of public schools. So depending on who you talk to, it's going to be ranked anywhere from the top public school in Texas to the second or the third. It's never below 4. And there are eyes in Austin and eyes all around school districts watching what's going on here. And if this can pass in South Lake, Texas, this will pass everywhere in the state of Texas. I'm not talking about the DISDs. I'm not talking about, the inner city schools. I'm talking about this will pass all over. And why it would be bad, we can get into that in a minute. But, within 10 years, every person that graduates from a high school in Texas, if this makes its rounds, which is what the people in Carroll want to see happen, it will totally change the way students view the country, view their communities. It's got some really disturbing things as part of it.
And again, I think it illustrates something we've been talking about for some time. When Marlon Maddox started this program back in 1972, which was 48 years ago, even then he was concerned about some of the things being taught in the public schools or the government schools. And since then, we've talked about race theory, we've talked about LGBTQ things, we've talked, and all under the guise of diversity. But this competency plan and cultural competence plan is really part of what's called the District Diversity Council. Can you kind of give us some history in that regard?
Yes. So there was a video that came out a couple of years ago with Carroll students.
Oh, yes.
Where they were singing a rap song. And in the rap song, they had the N-word, and they used it. And, something we obviously don't condone, we obviously don't think is appropriate, we think it's incredibly inappropriate. As a result of that, and these students had this video. It was on their own time, not at a school function. As a result, Carroll ISD went into full panic media mode. So I think what happened is this was their golden opportunity. Mm-hmm. However it happened, and that's my theory, they then went on just a media offensive, telling people, oh, it's horrible, it's awful, it's terrible, we got to fix this, South Lake is so bad, was kind of the way to, we've got to go attack these kids, go after them. And it was pretty egregious what they did for something that was done when the kids weren't even in school or on school grounds. So, and again, make it very clear, no one in South Lake thinks it's appropriate to use that word. No, I've never heard anyone in South Lake use it. I've never heard anyone in South Lake reference it. But the school district then created, as a result, this thing called the District Diversity Council. Now, you can probably guess when you create something called the District Diversity Council, you don't get an outpouring of conservatives to come join that, and you didn't. So it's filled with very liberal people in South Lake. And what they came up with, their big push and their thing that they did was they came up with this thing called the Cultural Competence Action Plan. Mm-hmm. Now, Carroll ISD has a 121-page student code of conduct. Mm-hmm. Now, I would submit to you, not a single person that works at Carroll ISD, administrator, superintendent, assistant superintendent, teacher, principal, could tell you everything in a 121-page document, and we certainly know students couldn't. But that wasn't enough to discipline students and control their behavior, so they come up with this Cultural Competence Action Plan. Cultural Competence Action Plan is a 34-page document with 152 action points. Wow. Here are some of those things. It mandates social justice training as a requirement for graduation. It mandates social justice curriculum to replace what has always been an exemplary modeled curriculum around the state. It implements a race-based hiring strategy instead of merit hiring. It actually creates a diversity police inside the school district, denying all due process for students. It basically creates a guilty until proven innocent culture to punish microaggressions. Now, microaggressions is a really key part of this plan. But here's how they define microaggressions. Snubs, insults, or offenses, intentional or unintentional, knowing or unknowing, that affects a protected group. So literally somebody could say, and there's 1,000 examples, somebody could say at the lunch table as a third grader, what's that smell? And a child who has curry for lunch could say they're offended over that, and then now that child gets written up. It becomes part of their permanent discipline file with the school, and whether they knew they did anything wrong or bad or not. And so the school district is already tracking microaggressions. Mm-hmm. I mean, just when you even hear the word, just the monotony of it. So they're creating this little let's go tell on everyone in the school. And, kids are kids. They're going to do dumb things. They're going to say some things. Yeah,
they're going to say some dumb things. Of course.
But they're not doing it because they're little racist, hateful Nazis, which is what these people would have you believe. So they're going to cover this and go over it I mean, the insanity of what they're doing is pretty sad.
We're going to take a break, and we're going to continue with Tim O'Hare. By the way, if you'd like to join us, I suspect you might even have a question. 1-800-351-1212. We're going to talk a little bit more about this cultural competence plan and the District Diversity Council. We just got started. We have a lot more to say right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The charge from liberal professors and progressive activists is that this country and this president are racist. This prevents non-white minorities from experiencing true economic opportunity. Minorities face economic discrimination. Stephen Moore is a finance and economics columnist who pulled together the latest Census Bureau reports to show how well minorities have been doing. Some of that has been hard to see of late because of the economic downturn created by the pandemic lockdowns. The Census Bureau reports that from 2016 to 2019, black incomes rose more than in any 3 years in the history of this country. Also, black poverty rates fell to their lowest level ever recorded. It might surprise you to learn that the highest income group in America are Asians. The median family income of Asian Americans is $98,000. How did Asians, many from Japan, Korea, India, China, and Taiwan, achieve this level? He suggests it could be that they have a stronger work ethic. Maybe they are more likely to go into occupations like science, engineering, or medicine with higher salaries. He says, who knows? The point he's making is this is not what you would expect from a country that discriminates against non-white citizens. It is not what you would find in a xenophobic society. What about other minorities? The average Hispanic household makes $56,000. He agrees that this is not rich, but it is a massive leap forward from what Hispanics earn in Mexico, El Salvador, or Cuba. He also documents the gains Latinos have made in the last 3 years. Economic opportunity is only one factor, but it is an important one that is rarely mentioned when the charge of racism against minorities is cited. These facts about median household income deserve to be considered. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In studio with me today, Tim O'Hare, as we talk about the Carroll ISD Cultural Competence Plan, part of the District Diversity Council. And you mentioned microaggressions. I think for some of our listeners, if you want to find some of my viewpoint commentaries, I've made a fairly long list one time. This goes back a couple of years ago to what microaggressions might be. And some of them are ones where you just roll your eyes saying, really? Like all people are a part of the human race, not just Black Lives Matter, but all lives matter. Or we're all part of one race, the human race, or that America is an exceptional country. Mm-hmm. That's considered a microaggression. Of course, if you wear a MAGA hat, that's a microaggression. Sometimes even if you have an American flag outside of your house, that's considered sometimes a microaggression. And of course, a while back, I did a commentary on white privilege. So I get the sense that, and then I might just point out later this second hour, we will be talking about George Soros and some of the ideas being funded there. And on Thursday, we have Doug Groteis talking about critical race theory. So a lot of these ideas that are very liberal, that oftentimes are on the college campus. And again, at least on a college campus, you can debate them sometimes. But when you bring them down to the middle school, the grade school, and the high school, that's a concern, right?
Well, absolutely it is. So this whole CCAP is based on, CCAP is what we call it in town, and everybody knows what it is in town, but this Cultural Competence Action Plan, it's based on critical race theory, but it also incorporates a number of elements regarding LGBTQ issues.
Right.
So they want to start teaching, and I find this so stunning, and I just don't think the rest of the world does anymore, but many do. They want to start teaching about LGBTQ issues in pre-K. Mm-hmm. They want to teach this to 4-year-olds. And, for issues like that, that should be left to the parents. We're fortunate, those of us that live in South Lake and inside the Carroll ISD boundaries, there's almost no poverty in Carroll ISD. People are very well off in Carroll ISD. For those that know, Highland Park, University Park in the Dallas area, this is kind of the Tarrant County version of Highland Park, if you will, spread out a little more land. But people there are of means. Almost everyone is in a 2-parent household. And, these are issues that you leave to the parents to teach their kids how they want to be taught. This is not a matter for the public schools, but they want to take over how kids think, what they believe. And as you know, Kerby, the people that get offended at anything and everything, especially when it comes to America, Christianity, our beliefs, are always liberals. Mm-hmm. We don't have a lot of conservatives coming up with what they're offended by. So the whole microaggression part of this, the only people that will ever be offended are the liberals' kids that they teach to be offended about things, and it teaches people to be victims, not victors. And we want to raise winners and overachievers and hard workers, not people who always think they're not getting a break because they're part of a mistreated class. And that's what this does.
Now, you have requests for open records and things like that, but I suspect from what I'm hearing you say is there are a few people that are really kind of pushing this, and there are a lot of people probably in South Lake that are going, what is going on? So really there's maybe a few, if you will, ringleaders, a few leaders that are kind of promoting this, not only in Carroll ISD, but even in Austin?
You bet. So the school board president, her name is Michelle Moore. The past president, Sherry Mills, who remains on the board, they are the board ringleaders of this. And then you have 2 assistant superintendents, Janet McDade and Julie Thanum. And Julie Thanum, just for example, she is someone that attended a women's march. I believe it was in D.C. It might have been the one in New York, and was very proud of it. And as your listeners know, those women's marches are put on by Planned Parenthood, and they're about abortion. They're not about empowering women. And so we've got, in a very conservative community, some very leftist, liberal ideas that have made their way into the school district. And one of the things they're doing, they brought a speaker in named Doc Brown to in February to talk to teachers during an in-service. And they paid this gentleman, who is a self-proclaimed social justice warrior, huge Obama supporter. They brought him in to talk about white privilege and paid him $15,000 for a 90-minute speech. So this same guy went and gave the same speech at another school district for $9,500. And we're like, what in the world? Why are we paying somebody $15,000 when somebody else paid $9,500? Or why are we even paying that to begin with to go talk to teachers? Well, we do some digging with open records requests, and we've sent out hundreds of open records requests and received all sorts of interesting information, one of which is this particular group, Carroll ISD's paid them over $40,000 in the last couple of years, and who is one of his paid speakers as part of his speakers bureau? Our assistant superintendent, Janet McDade. So it's big business for liberals, and it's not just at the federal levels. It's at even the smallest levels. This is how they interact and how they make money. This same assistant superintendent, part of the CCAP, has created a position called the District Diversity Culture Coach. Mm-hmm. Well, guess who got that job and a bump in salary? The assistant superintendent's husband, who's also the basketball coach. So it's very incestuous, but people are awake. They're aware. We formed a PAC, South Lake Families PAC, to fight this, to fund lawsuits, to recruit candidates. And the response, and this isn't a sales pitch, the response has been overwhelming. So much so, we hit our financial goal that I thought, we'd be lucky to get to 75% of it. We exceeded it by 25% in a month and have essentially shut down fundraising efforts. We've got enough money to fund lawsuits and fund candidates for the next 3 or 4 years. So it has been a remarkable outpouring of support by the community.
First of all, I wanted to cover this because I want people to hear some of the success, because oftentimes people say, what can I do? Well, again, they can learn from you. We, of course, have a link to your website there on your law firm, so if they wanted to contact you or something. But let's talk about action items, because as you point out, if you can pick off Carroll ISD, you can pick off every school district in the state.
You sure can.
Really, everyone in the country. And since there are people even outside of Texas listening to this right now, they can learn some lessons from you as well. But talk about what we can, or what individuals can do, because they might learn from your success and your own experience to figure out what they want to do in their own school district if they don't happen to be in Carroll ISD.
First thing is organize. Get a group of people who want to stop this kind of nonsense in the schools and get together and formulate a plan. Our plan was to create a PAC, to raise money, to fund lawsuits, to go speak at school board meetings, to go email school board members. Your typical local school board,
yeah.
You might have one person that shows up to speak at a meeting. We are consistently having 20, 30, 40, 50 people show up and speak. We're having, and they've tried to now limit public comments to a minute. Try to formulate a thought or a sentence in a minute. I mean, this is how much they're fighting back on it. We did an open records request here in Texas, and there's many, states all over the country have similar laws. We have something called the Open Meetings Act.
Right.
The Open Meetings Act says people on boards, councils like this cannot engage in dialogue outside of the public forum.
Right.
Outside of a publicly posted meeting. So we found the school board president through open records request text messages where she is, before the big vote to approve CCAP, which we've stalled. Before that vote, she was communicating with 4 other board members. A quorum in that scenario is 4. She was communicating with 5. So somebody has filed a complaint with the district attorney's office. They're investigating. A lawsuit was filed over that issue. And this is the thing that I will tell you President Trump has taught conservatives. Love him, like him, tolerate him. He has taught us how to fight. And for so long, at the local level, the federal level, the state level, liberals fight and conservatives show up mild-mannered and polite, and they don't want to rock the boat. And he's finally taught people how to fight. And so now conservatives are fighting, and conservatives are doing the things that liberals have been doing to fight things for years. Well, we finally caught up, and what we've seen in Southlake is pretty amazing. So we're the outpouring of people who love America and who don't believe in critical race theory and who don't think public schools should be the place for social engineering. There's a whole lot more of them than people think. And if you stand up and say you're going to fight and you're ready to lead the effort, people will follow, people will lead, and we've seen that in Southlake. It's been really encouraging.
Well, Tim, thank you so much for coming in here today. Of course, some people have heard you on with Mark Davis and even substituting for him, and we just are so grateful for you. And if people want more information, you've got all sorts of pieces of paper here so that you don't have to reinvent the wheel. Feel free to contact him. We have information about him and a law firm, and we'll keep following this whole issue of the Cultural Competence Plan and the work of the District Council on diversity. And I appreciate you being in the studio with us today.
Thank you very much for having us on, Kerby.
We're going to take a break, and we'll get back into some of the issues in the news. Wanted you to know about that, and most importantly, encourage you to contact Tim if you'd like to learn more about what might be happening in your school district and how you can learn to fight. We'll be back right after this.
2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. A couple of the articles I've posted on the website, I certainly encourage you to get copies of. One of those by Matt Vespa, in which he points out that there has been a lot of back and forth on, of course, these Hunter Biden emails that are found on a laptop. And in particular, the article reminds us that even some of these very liberal reporters are chastising other liberals and people in the New York Times and the Washington Post and others for making up stories and saying things that are demonstrably false. And this is one of the reasons why I encourage you, as I say so often in this program, to read widely. Because if you just read one source, they'll say, well, this is a Russian disinformation campaign, or these were hacked. As a matter of fact, I actually posted this so it would get your attention as emails were not hacked, because you hear that, and this is not true, and it's very easy to demonstrate that. But nevertheless, let me just go to the piece that we've posted here. Then I want to get into some of the comments by the Director of National Intelligence, the former member of Congress, John Ratcliffe. But first of all, let's go to Matt Vespa, and he says, Hunter Biden forgot to pick up his MacBook Pro, which contained very sensitive emails about the Biden family business deals, which Matt says are all dirty. Yeah, I think you might agree with that. It shows at the very least that Joe Biden knew about Hunter's business deals despite previous denials. Goes through all the details that we've talked about before, the incredible amount that Hunter Biden was being paid each month when he really had no competence in the area, but certainly it was the access to his father, who at that time was the vice president. And he goes on in the next paragraph to say that Hunter Biden dropped off his computer for repairs in Delaware, April 2019, and never picked it up. The owner, after a while, began to notice, as I've talked about before, that there's a lot of incriminating information. Actually, the owner didn't even look at it at first because he tried to repair it. And then he was starting to think, do I have something that's illegal? And I really need to check this out. So what he did was he made a copy of it so that he would have it. Then he decided to make 2 more copies. And so he had, I think, 3 copies overall, and then turned the hard drive over to the FBI. One of those copies then was given to Rudy Giuliani's lawyer. And nevertheless, it's obvious there was no hack because it was simply copying from the hard drive, which actually is in the possession right now of the FBI. So first of all, back to my point, there's no hack. It was just a son forgetting to pick up his laptop that had a lot of dirty laundry in it. Matter of fact, the owner, if I remember right, it's not in this article, but I think he said he might have been drunk at the time, so he may not even remember where he took his laptop. But nevertheless, that's the case. So first of all, there was no hack. Second of all, the idea that it was Russian misinformation, well, that's kind of difficult here as well. And the other one, which I haven't heard yet, because so far the Biden camp has yet to say that these emails were fake. So that's kind of where you are. I'm going to get to certainly some of the things from the National Intelligence Chair, John Ratcliffe, in just a minute. But I thought the piece that I posted here might be of interest to you because you have Michael Tracy, who would call himself a liberal progressive, nevertheless has posted all sorts of Twitter posts in which he's just been taking on some of the liberal lines. He says, I don't know if Ratcliffe is credible on this issue. He's talking about, of course, the Director of National Intelligence. But if you think Adam Schiff is remotely credible in anything involving Russia, you immediately need to check into the nearest mental institution. I'm only going to give you a couple of the Twitter posts because this goes on for a couple of pages. But nevertheless, another one. But the email's slogan seems to me more designed to boost the sense of smug self-satisfaction possessed by the pro-smug corners of the media than actually to do anything like real journalistic inquiry of a guy who may soon become the president. In other words, he's criticizing his fellow journalists that aren't even tracing it down. I mean, if indeed you think this are phony, then trace it down. Go and interview some of these individuals. That's what Rudy Giuliani has said, and a variety of other people that have looked at this. I mean, these mention names and places, even apart from the vice president, and check those out. If those turn out to be phony, well, then okay, maybe the whole thing is. Of course, I think they'll find out it isn't. Michael Tracy on October 18th, I guess it says, and what's funny about this claim of disinformation nowadays is they're usually coming from people that are actually engaged in disinformation. He says an interesting, effective propagandistic inversion, which is easy enough to pull out when most of the media class does nothing but regurgitate evidence-free assertions. And one other one a while back, we don't even think the Hunter Biden materials constitute some kind of earth-shattering story to be absolutely repulsed by the propaganda being used against it. And that's the point I think I might make. There are some people that say, well, this is going to be, I don't know, the thing that will elect Donald Trump. Donald Trump's been talking about Joe Biden and some of the corruption for months, years. And I don't see any evidence that resonates with the American voters. But it is a story that needs to be covered because, Joe Biden could be your next president of the United States. And if there's that level of corruption and other governments have that much leverage over him, we as the American people certainly need to know. So regardless of who is elected November 3rd, we need to know more about that. Which brings us to the other piece, because one of the things being peddled is that this is part of a Russian disinformation campaign, and the director of national intelligence is John Ratcliffe. He is an individual that served in Congress here from the state of Texas. Why do we have a director of national intelligence? Well, that goes all the way back to 9/11. Again, just a little bit of history here. Maybe this is too boring for some of you, but hang with me for a second, because we've had so many different intelligence agencies that it's really important to at least have somebody sort of oversee all of those. And so basically, the director of national intelligence, John Ratcliffe, said that Hunter Biden's recovered laptop and emails show that Joe Biden was involved in his son's foreign business dealings, and it's not part of some Russian disinformation campaign. He was on, I think it was Fox Business when he made these comments, but he said it a few other places. He said, it's funny that some of the people who complain the most about the intelligence being politicized are the ones politicizing the intelligence. He says, unfortunately, it is Adam Schiff who said that the intelligence community believes that the Hunter Biden laptop and emails are part of a Russian disinformation campaign. Well, the director of the national intelligence says, let me be clear. The intelligence community doesn't believe that because there is no intelligence that supports that, and we have shared no intelligence with Adam Schiff or any member of Congress. So either you've got to believe that the director of national intelligence, first of all, is lying about having evidence about Russian disinformation, and then also lying about never sharing any of that with Adam Schiff or any other member of Congress, or I think the more likely thing is Adam Schiff made it up. And so there's kind of where we find ourselves right now in terms of this. And it was interesting that others have said, look, I don't know, even our liberal person I was quoting, Michael Tracy, saying, I don't know if Radcliffe is credible on this, but he knows for sure that Adam Schiff is not. And so that was, I think, kind of the interesting comment that came out of the news cycle yesterday. And I thought I'd cover it. We'll get into maybe some more of the details of that later. But just before we take a break, one of the other articles I posted is by Catherine Jean Lopez, because she talks about how Amy Barrett, that is Amy Coney Barrett, is an antidote to our culture of contempt, and really starts out with a story that I will talk about after the break, because it's a story that was told, interestingly enough, by the Democratic senator from New Jersey, Cory Booker, and talks about how, in some respects, we do need to have individuals that are going to have a greater degree of respect, and even quotes Arthur Brooks, who's been on this program, and we've quoted him extensively in other commentaries I've done, about one of the biggest problems we seem to face today in politics is contempt. And that book that Arthur Brooks published is, I think, a good example of the fact that in a culture where there is shaming, where there's a cancel culture, where there's a great deal of contempt, you have somebody as gracious as Amy Coney Barrett. The other day I was at an event where somebody said, she might eventually be a perfect role model I guess Kelly Shackelford even shared that on Friday about his daughter, but one of the others said, might be the closest thing we have in America to Mother Teresa. That might have been a little bit of an overstatement, but again, you have somebody who's been very gracious in the midst of a great deal of hostility, certainly showed great compassion for other students, as well as wanting to adopt children from Haiti and a number of things. And so I just thought we might come back and say, so often, can't we get some really positive role models out for our kids? And I think maybe she's going to be one of those. And I'm looking forward to that possibility. But nevertheless, I'll come back to that and also raise the question, well, if indeed she's confirmed, won't that force a packing of the Supreme Court? Well, Marco Rubio has an answer to that right after these important messages.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
In fact, once again, one of my articles here is about how Amy Coney Barrett might be an antidote to our culture of contempt. And if you wonder where that comes from, this is the book I have in front of me here for those of you watching online, and it's entitled Love Your Enemies by Arthur Brooks. And it's how decent people can save America from the culture of contempt. Now, first of all, it is something that I have quoted from in some of my Viewpoint commentaries. We've also done an interview with him, and I might might also give him high marks because Arthur Brooks also spoke at the National Prayer Breakfast. And, of course, he's an unusual individual. I love what Jonah Goldberg said on the back here. Arthur Brooks is a strange creature by Washington standards. Heck, he's a strange creature by bipedal standards. A former French horn player who decided to be an egghead late in life. He's a unique mix of Catholic piety, data obsession, sartorial connoisseurism, physical fitness, old soul wisdom, and basic decency. Kind of an interesting summary of an individual that we've known even since he was a professor at Syracuse. And of course, he was at the American Enterprise Institute and doing all sorts of different things that we've appreciated over the years. But nevertheless, it's the issue of the culture of contempt. Now, let's give credit where credit is due, because Catherine Jean Lopez quotes from Senator Cory Booker, who's a Democrat. I'm pretty sure Catherine Lopez is a Republican. Don't know that for sure, but I know she's pro-life and Catholic. But nevertheless, she said that during one of the hearings, Cory Booker talked about somebody came up to him and said, "Dude, I want you to punch Donald Trump in the face." Well, Senator Cory Booker said, "Dude, that's a felony," which I thought was a great line. And really basically trying to say, wait a minute, is a culture of contempt is something we need to set aside. And basically what Catherine Lopez points out is that, you know, it is quite possible that Amy Coney Barrett may be one of the best things that has happened to American politics in a long time. She says Washington needs her, America needs her. She embodies grace in a lot of ways in her public witness. Listening to her in some of the exchanges was a civic lesson when it wasn't insane, to borrow the words of Peggy Noonan, the Pulitzer Prize winner speech writer for President Ronald Reagan, about the state of the nation's capital today. But we do mean insane. I'd walk away from the hearings, come back and find a senator asking about whether Barrett has ever sexually harassed someone. What? Where did that come from? Well, actually, she asks that. The Hawaiian senator asks that all the time. But nevertheless, I had flashbacks to when Democrats threw the kitchen sink at Brett Kavanaugh. One accusation was one thing, but then it seemed they were ready to pull women off the street to make accusations against him. But the point she's making is that she said Arthur Brooks has diagnosed what is ailing American politics. Here's the quote from him. "America's addicted to political contempt. While most of us hate what it is doing to our country and worry about how contempt coarsens our culture over the long term, many of us still compulsively consume the ideological equivalent of meth from elected officials, academics, entertainers, and some in the news media." I'll leave the quote there, but you can see that that is part of the problem. And Arthur Brooks says that contempt is impractical. It's bad for a country dependent on people working together in politics, communities, and the economy. Unless we hope to become a one-party state, we cannot afford contempt for our fellow Americans who simply disagree with us. And so, if nothing else, maybe Amy Coney Barrett will be one of those individuals that will be very significant role model. And you know as well as I that oftentimes when they ask for the most admired individuals, usually the president is on that, maybe not this time, but usually. And when they ask for the most admired woman, it's usually the first lady, probably not this time because she's associated with Donald Trump. But it will be interesting to see whether or not maybe Amy Coney Barrett makes that list, if indeed she is confirmed to the Supreme Court. Which brings me to one other issue. This one I did not post, but you can find it very easily, and that is where Senator Marco Rubio from Florida has made the case that you just have to stop listening to this argument that if you confirm Amy Coney Barrett, will pack the Supreme Court. Because he basically says in this interview that he did that they had already made up their minds years ago. As a matter of fact, in an op-ed, he actually talked about the fact that it has always been their plan to pack the Supreme Court with liberal judges, and he gives you some very good illustrations as to why. Because he says, you don't need to wait for a presidential nominee Joe Biden's long-promised and still elusive answer to know that a Biden administration would sign legislation into law allowing them to pack the Supreme Court with left-wing activists. Biden may claim he's not a fan of court packing, but when asked directly last week whether he would support it, he acknowledged it depends on how the Judge Amy Coney Barrett's nomination turns out. Well, Marco Rubio says this. This isn't about Amy Coney Barrett or Justice Neil Gorsuch or Justice Brett Kavanaugh. The truth is that this has been in the works since Donald Trump was elected president of the United States 4 years ago. And he says the easy proof of that is that back a year ago, and I did not realize this, in March of 2019, don't know how I missed this, he and several Republican colleagues proposed a constitutional amendment that would limit the Supreme Court to 9 justices. So before anybody even started thinking about Amy Coney Barrett, other than just as a hypothetical in the future, they had already proposed this amendment. And so this is what then Marco Rubio says. It is telling that no Democratic senator has co-sponsored my constitutional amendment, which would merely keep the Supreme Court at the same number of seats that it has had since 1869. So he's arguing that while protecting the integrity of the Supreme Court is important, the fight against the Democratic Party, he says, is more significant as well. And so he makes the point that this is more about our institutions and about what happens to our country, our communities, our way of life. If the, as he says, radical left and Democratic Party destroy them, he says it's clear that they don't want to pack the Supreme Court just to cancel out the votes of Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, and Brett Kavanaugh, and soon maybe Amy Coney Barrett. They want to pack the court to cancel out your ability to resist their radical agenda. He even points out that if you want to talk about radical, our founders believed in a radical idea that all men are created equal, that their rights come from God, from their Creator. That idea and the very premise of our nation's founding is increasingly under assault, he says, from the left. They would have you believe that America and its founding is irredeemably racist and that nothing short of a revolution is acceptable. And so then he certainly points out that if you want to get a sense of what that looks like, he says if the left succeeds in packing the Supreme Court, they will be one step closer to erasing our founding and values in pursuit of progressive utopias. And I love this, like Seattle's Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, you know, the Chaz that didn't last very long. So nevertheless, that's the argument being made by certainly Marco Rubio. And I think the most compelling part of his argument is simply this. Back in March of 2019, I did not realize that he had actually sponsored that legislation more than a year ago. They proposed a constitutional amendment to actually establish that there will be just simply 9 members on the Supreme Court. And in this now almost year and a half, he has yet to get one Democratic senator to co-sponsor this constitutional amendment, which tells you how difficult it will be to get the amendment passed because, again, Constitution 101, 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, 3/4 of the various legislatures to actually turn it into, I guess it'd be the 28th Amendment. So it's a great idea. I think it's a necessary action item, but it illustrates again that that perhaps won't happen. And it really has nothing to do with Amy Coney Barrett. That's just the next excuse that will be used for it. Well, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about a variety of things. Ephesians, the book of Ephesians. We're going to talk about George Soros and the impact that he's having. We'll talk about some pollsters who think that Donald Trump actually is ahead. They would be in the minority, but we'll talk about all those issues right after these important messages.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/sign-up. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me for the Tuesday edition here of Point of View. Over the next 2 hours, we're going to cover a lot of topics, so kind of hang in here. Just a few minutes, we're going to be talking with Dr. Scotty Smith, and we'll get into some things which I think will really help you understand the Bible and really think about how to begin to deeply dig into God's Word. So we'll talk about that. Also, we're going to be talking about, in the next part of the hour, a pollster who actually thinks Donald Trump is ahead. Now, he's the minority, but we at least want to look at that and see what he might have to say about that. We'll get into some of the things that I've posted on whether or not these emails that were reported by the New York Post were hacked. They were not. And you'll get some perspective on that and even some reaction from the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe. Next hour, let me just also point out that Dr. Frank Wright will be with us. We'll be talking about George Soros. They have put together a video that you can watch as well as a book that educates you about those issues, and then we'll get into some other topics that are certainly relevant. Just before we get into this, though, I thought, if nothing else, for our listeners in California and North Carolina, we might talk about ballot harvesting, because it's a good illustration of how oftentimes when one party is in control, they give themselves certain power or certain opportunities. They never think about what happens if the other party's in control. For example, you can see that all during the 8 years of Barack Obama's presidency, no real peep about using executive orders, but never thought about the fact that then incoming President Donald Trump would use those executive orders in ways that maybe they didn't anticipate. Or you can turn it around. During the time after our terrorist attack, there was all sorts of power and privilege that was given to the intelligence community, even to the Justice Department. But at that time, everybody said, well, we got John Ashcroft as Attorney General, so we feel good about that. Never thinking that, maybe someday you might have a very different Attorney General under the Obama administration. And the good example of that is ballot harvesting. Now, for those of you in North Carolina, you say ballot harvesting, that's illegal. Yes, we actually had in North Carolina a congressional record race which was completely overturned in that regard. But nevertheless, back in 2016, the Democratic Party, which is basically a one-party rule in California, passed a law allowing anybody, including paid campaign operatives and political parties, to collect and return mail-in ballots. 2 years later, again, they were able to make that very successful. And as a matter of fact, in 2018, many people think that ballot harvesting may have been what contributed to the flipping of 7 different House seats in Orange County that traditionally were held by Republicans, now were held by Democrats. Well, eventually the Republicans kind of had the philosophy, well, if you can't beat them, join them. And so they decided to do so. And so they began to actually post what are called harvest ballot boxes. They post them in places like churches and gun shops and shooting ranges and things like that. All of a sudden, then, the Democrats are suddenly alarmed, and the state attorney general and the secretary of state last week sent a letter actually complaining about these drop boxes. And I love the response that came back. He said, well, we believe that temporarily holding vote by mail ballots in a locked box at a church or even at a party headquarters is more secure than a party volunteer or paid operative holding harvested ballots collected from voters at a senior center in the backseat of his or her car. And so, again, you're going to have this ongoing battle, and it's one of those which, again, will surface as we get closer to the November election. So those of you in California are noticing how this is unfolding before our very eyes, because, after all, if ballot harvesting has been allowed by the Democrats, why shouldn't it also be allowed by the Republicans? So anyway, it's kind of an interesting story that surfaced while we're in the midst of a political campaign. Let's, we can talk about how you can really study God's Word, and there is a whole series of gospel-centered life in the Bible series, and I think you would really appreciate some of the material that's been put together by Dr. Scotty Smith. He has planted and pastored the Christ Community Church in Franklin, Tennessee. Worked in the past on the West End Community Church, has served as an adjunct faculty member at Covenant Seminary, Westminster Seminary, Reformed Seminary, Western Seminary, author of a variety of different books: Unveiled Hope, Objects of His Affection, Restoring Broken Things, Everyday Prayers, Every Season Prayers, and of course this one, which we're going to talk about right now, Ephesians, The Love We Long For. I might also mention we have information about him on our website, and you can even begin to read his blog, Heavenward, which is actually published on the Gospel Coalition. So, Scotty, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thank you, Kerby. Great to be with you on this beautiful fall day in Franklin, Tennessee.
And you probably have some great colors to look at as well. But, you know, it's interesting.
We really do.
When you talk about Ephesians, I think it reminds me of an interview I did years ago with Chuck Swindoll when he had done a book on Romans, and I used the example that some people have said that if you were on an island and you only could have one book of the Bible, you'd probably want to have the book of Romans because you'd have so much great theology. And Chuck Swindoll jumped in at that point and said, you know, if I was on an island by myself, I think the book I'd want is How to Build a Boat. But nevertheless, I would say that if you wanted another book that of the Bible that would teach you about grace, teach you about the gospel, teach you about the importance of families, talk about the significant battles that we face in terms of spiritual warfare. The book of Ephesians really is one that covers that and many other issues, doesn't it?
Absolutely. And, of course, when the Apostle Paul wrote Ephesians, he was writing to a very diverse culture of men and women coming to faith from literally every economic, political, religious background. So it's a very timely book for our day, where we have a lot of themes and a lot of longings and a lot of brokenness.
One of the things I love about your book, and maybe I'll take a break and we'll come back and get into it in more detail, is that you have broken it down into 12 lessons. And Scotty, one of the things I appreciate is so many of our listeners that are out there actually are teaching it. Either they're pastors, they're small group leaders, Bible fellowship leaders, or maybe they're teaching their kids at home. They're having quiet times, personal study. And what you've done is really take the book of Ephesians, break it down into aspects of the gospel, God's provision, growing in the knowledge and love of Jesus, cultivating a culture of grace, then the whole idea of repentance and holiness, and even a gospel-shaped marriage and home life, and then working unto the Lord in terms of the workplace, and then finally in terms of this issue of spiritual warfare. So let's take a break, but when we come back, we have information about this. It's a wonderful opportunity to really get into God's Word. There's a study guide. It has some leader notes. It's some great resources, and if you find yourself saying, now, that would be really good. I'd like to see if I can really plumb the depths of what God could teach me and what Scotty could teach me as a very gifted teacher. That resource is available on our website, pointofview.net. And, of course, we also have a link to his website as well, and also a link to his blog at the Gospel Coalition, Heavenward. So if you find yourself saying, I'd like to learn a little bit more about some of these very important spiritual issues from a person that has been writing about this for so many years, we have that link there as well. But we'll come back and talk more about Ephesians, the love we long for, right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The charge from liberal professors and progressive activists is that this country and this president are racist. This prevents non-white minorities from experiencing true economic opportunity. Minorities face economic discrimination. Stephen Moore is a finance and economics columnist who pulled together the latest Census Bureau reports to show how well minorities have been doing. Some of that has been hard to see of late because of the economic downturn created by the pandemic lockdowns. The Census Bureau reports that from 2016 to 2019, black incomes rose more than in any 3 years in the history of this country. Also, black poverty rates fell to their lowest level ever recorded. It might surprise you to learn that the highest income group in America are Asians. The median family income of Asian Americans is $98,000. How did Asians, many from Japan, Korea, India, China, and Taiwan, achieve this level? He suggests it could be that they have a stronger work ethic. Maybe they are more likely to go into occupations like science, engineering, or medicine with higher salaries. He says, who knows? The point he's making is this is not what you would expect from a country that discriminates against non-white citizens. It is not what you would find in a xenophobic society. What about other minorities? The average Hispanic household makes $56,000. He agrees that this is not rich, but it is a massive leap forward from what Hispanics earn in Mexico, El Salvador, or Cuba. He also documents the gains Latinos have made in the last 3 years. Economic opportunity is only one factor, but it is an important one that is rarely mentioned when the charge of racism against minorities is cited. These facts about median household income deserve to be considered. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Pleased to have with us Scotty Smith for a little bit longer as we talk about his book on Ephesians, The Love We Long For. And this is just an outstanding study guide in some respects, broken down into 12 lessons. But Scotty, listen, we can't talk about this because what you do is you talk about kind of the big idea in the lesson. Then you kind of have like a Bible conversation and kind of set that into some kind of context. Then you have an article, and usually you point out that it's about 5 minutes, so it's real easy to work through. Then you have a discussion, an exercise, which is another kind of follow-up, and then a wrap-up and prayer. So this is really sort of a hands-on opportunity to help people dig much deeper into this particular book of the Bible, and that's really kind of how you designed it, so that individuals can do it individually, but I also think for those on our listening audience that are small group leaders or pastors or Bible fellowship or Bible study leaders, this would be just excellent to take an entire group through, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. And the design indeed presupposes that we are to engage with head, heart, and hands, that we are to study good, rich biblical theology, but to see by God's Spirit that become a compelling music and beauty in our hearts that really moves us into the culture as good neighbors and those that live and love to the glory of God.
And part of what you were actually alluding to is the fact that we are dealing with, in this letter that Paul writes to Ephesus, a group of individuals from very different areas. So you have Jewish believers, you have Gentile believers, you have others that maybe were just seekers. And in some respects, given kind of the racial diversity we're dealing with right now, the desire to kind of bring everybody together on the same kind of unity in the body of Christ, in some respects, this particular book of the Bible is more relevant than ever, isn't it?
Really is, because the vision is what God is doing for us in Christ to redeem his every nation family, to reflect the beauty that can only be found through the power of the gospel, which of course is the person and the work of Jesus. So it's so relevant, perhaps in my 70 years of life, never more relevant.
One of the words you use is one I'm pretty sure you've coined, adoration, I guess, talk about that for just a minute, because that surfaces through. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I've been charged a lot with creating words, so guilty as charged. But no, Kerby, adoration leading to action. Worship is a lifestyle. It's not simply a style we choose to fulfill our own consumer orientation. And we know that the two great commandments of loving God with everything we have and our neighbors as ourselves, that presupposes adoring God in response to his great love for us in Christ, and then being those that love outwardly in God's world, a world that he is committed to redeem and restore through the person of his son, Jesus.
One of the things that I appreciate about your book is that you really take some time kind of focusing on the major institutions. Lesson 4, for example, is on the church. The church isn't optional. And in a few minutes, we'll get into, of course, the idea of marriage and the idea of family, because in some respects, we need to come back to some of these basic biblical principles at a time when some people think, well, church is optional, maybe even marriage is optional, maybe even getting married to have kids is optional. This really brings us back to some of the basics that we need to apply in the Christian life.
Absolutely. And to see these as primary environments where the love of God exists for his glory and the benefit of our neighbors. So, yes, indeed, church today, people are saying foolish things like, I love Jesus, but I want nothing to do with the church. Well, that's really not an option, and the more we know Jesus, the more we will rightly orient ourselves towards his church and his church in the world as well.
Well, we talked about church. Let's talk about what you talk about in Lesson 9, the gospel-shaped marriage. At a time when the divorce rate has increased dramatically, and the only reason it dropped a little bit was because more people are living together and not even getting married, so they're not getting divorced. This message in chapter or Lesson 9, more important than ever before.
Absolutely. And in Paul's letter of Ephesians, what we see is the compelling beauty and paradigm is Jesus as the ultimate spouse, his great love for his people, so that in a gospel-shaped marriage, you have a husband and a wife out serving one another in response to the ultimate quintessential servant leader and Lord, the Lord Jesus Christ.
Lesson 10, of course, talks about the home life, or the idea of parenting. And I love one of the exercises, Our Father and Our Parenting, because in some respects, Scotty, what we're talking about is when Paul is addressing the marriage situation here on earth, he's also mirroring what is happening and the relationship between us and Christ in heaven. True?
Absolutely, and that which we will enjoy forever in life in the new heaven and new earth. And same with the paradigm of parenting, as you mentioned. As we are parented, as we are fathered by Abba Father, we really change the focus on seeing our children as the fulfillment of our identity, but rather loving our children as stewards as unto the Lord. And there's a big shift in power and goal and freedom and beauty for our children.
Again, there are 12 lessons, but I'll just pick out one more, and that is Lesson 11 about the gospel in the workplace. And then you even have a workplace self-questionnaire. So we've talked about the church, we've talked about marriage, we've talked about family, and of course people spend a disproportionate amount of their life in the workplace. And yet the book of Ephesians and the letter that Paul writes to Ephesus, but also the one he writes to Philemon and some others, all relate back to this idea of the workplace, right?
Yes, vocation is calling, not just my job. And, of course, the vision of vocation is birth in the Garden of Eden, where God said to his first son and daughter, fill the earth with my glory. Before work got broken, work was good, and we need to reclaim that sense of calling in every sphere of life and every square inch of God's cosmos. Kirby.
Let me just mention, too, that this is a resource that people can get a copy of. We've made it available both in paperback and Kindle. But talk about how to use this study, because there, as I said before, is a text, there's an article, there's an exercise. At the very back, you even have some follow-up material, a leader's notes and everything. So this is, I guess, to use my favorite line, kind of plug and play. I mean, if you want to go and take people through Ephesians, this is really put together in a way that everybody can begin to use it.
That is the design, and in a COVID world where maybe some of us are not as mobile yet as we will be hopefully soon, it can work for individual, for friends, through Zoomcast, or in corporate community. Yeah, it's designed by New Growth Press. All their studies in this series are designed personally, corporately, and they are so on-ramp, user-friendly.
Let me just, before you go, also mention we have a link to thegospelcoalition.org, and then you can find Scotty Smith. We already have it going to heavenward. And your most recent post was Loving Well When We Vote Differently. This is a conversation we were having yesterday on the program, but again, just because we may disagree about how we vote, we certainly should exercise civility. We should certainly give grace and recognize that there is a lot of tension. As a matter of fact, after the break, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about our culture of contempt and how some people think that Amy Coney Barrett and others might be a good antidote to this culture of contempt. But you're writing about that as well. If people want to learn a little bit more, they can go to the link that we have to your blog post. And I appreciate the fact that you're writing about these issues during this election season.
Well, thank you, Kirby, for all you do to bring a good bit of gospel sanity to our culture and your very wide audience. And it's just a privilege to join you in that calling, and certainly praying with thanksgiving for the fact that God has established his King Jesus, and we can trust in the occupied throne of heaven as we move forward into this season.
We'll appreciate the work that you've done all these years at Christ Community Church. I hear about it all the time, run into people that have been there and people that have benefited from your teaching and preaching. And if you want to get in a very well-produced program that helps you take your gospel into your life, and it has both a study guide, a leader's notes, and all the rest, Scotty Smith, Ephesians, The Love We Long For. And we have information about it on our website. Most likely you can probably find it in your local bookstore, but we've also made it easy for you to get a hold of it. And if you want to really dig deep into God's Word, this is another way to do it. So, Scotty, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kirby. My privilege, and God bless you, and look forward to listening to more of the program today.
We are going to spend some time now getting into a couple of controversial issues. Of course, next hour we'll be talking about George Soros. Let me just give you an idea that we'll be talking with Jay Richards tomorrow, and that will get into some of the panic of the pandemic. And then on Thursday, we'll talk with Doug Grotice about critical race theory. So, as we say before, there are a lot of issues, and we're quite willing to cover them. And if you're willing to listen and interact, that's what we do here on Point of View. So we'll come back and pick out a couple of things, one of which is there's a couple of people now quoting this pollster that is convinced that Donald Trump is ahead. Every other pollster says he's way behind. What about that? We'll talk about this right after these messages.
"2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again, is Kerby Anderson.
For a few minutes, I want to talk about polling. As you've heard me say on this program so many times before, the only poll that matters is how you vote and what happens on November 3rd. But a number have been saying, well, what about some of these polls? Some, for example, almost all the averaged polls right now say that Joe Biden's going to win, that he has locked up not only the West Coast, but most of the Northeast and the upper Midwest, which would be things like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, things like that, and Illinois. That would be enough. You know, even if Donald Trump does win Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Iowa, Ohio, and some of those that are considered kind of battleground states, he still loses. But there's at least one pollster, and people always say, what about this pollster? You know, I say, okay, you're talking about Robert Cahaly, right? Okay, let's talk about that for a minute, because he is absolutely convinced that Donald Trump is ahead. And you go, how in the world? I mean, all the other pollsters actually have Joe Biden ahead. I mean, right now, the Democratic Party is ready to measure the curtains in the Oval Office. But before you jump too quickly down that road, this is a man who last time in 2016 actually had Trump leading in Michigan and Pennsylvania. Guess what? He won. He also had Ron DeSantis winning his gubernatorial race, and that was pretty significant as well. And so if nothing else, those were some great opportunities for him to be very successful. And so in some respects, he actually was able to kind of begin to break the code, and he is convinced that if nothing else, we are dealing with oftentimes what is called the Bradley effect. That goes back to the mayor of Los Angeles, Tom Bradley, who underperformed in terms of the gubernatorial race, in large part because sometimes people weren't necessarily being honest about voting against him, because he was African American. But also, one of the things that Robert Cahaly points out is most of these pollsters have very long questionnaires. And if you call somebody who is at dinner, they're trying to take care of their kids, and tell them, we just need to have you answer 25 or 30 questions, they're just not going to do that. And so he has much shorter questions. He mixes up how he contacts people, sometimes through phone calls, through texts, through auto calls, and all the rest. And so as a result, he also has very large sample sizes. And as a result, he is convinced that indeed Trump is going to win North Carolina and Florida. He also is convinced he's going to win Georgia, and that Trump is even, he thinks, in the lead in Arizona, but maybe not yet in Pennsylvania, and also thinks he's going to win in Michigan. So this is sort of the outlier for very significant issues. And so I did want to cover that briefly, but I also have heard that we have now been able to connect up with Joel Rosenberg. So I thought for just a minute might have a chance to hear from our good friend Joel Rosenberg. So Joel, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, sir, great to be with you.
Let's, if we can, talk about what is happening right now over in Israel. And, of course, you've been watching the campaign and the election. So I just want to turn it over for you for just a few minutes, because we haven't had a chance to connect up with you. And I'd love to know your thoughts about what's happening in America and also what's happening in Israel right now.
Well, it's great to be with you, Kerby, as always. And I'm sorry about last week. We were looking forward to that, and I'm sorry it didn't work on our side. But look, if for starting with the election, if Israeli people are watching very, very closely, maybe more closely than any American presidential election, and if it were up to Israelis, President Trump would win in a landslide. A poll that came out last week that we reported about at our new website, All Israel News, which is allisrael.com, showed that 2/3 of the Israeli people support Donald Trump and believe he would be better for Israel. Only 19% of Israelis support Joe Biden, who has been traditionally very friendly towards Israel overall. There's some big policy differences Israelis have with Biden, but Biden has been perceived as pro-Israel, not hostile. So that's amazing. You know, it's basically 63% to 19%. Now, that's obviously entirely different from the American Jewish community, which is breaking about 70%
right.
Biden and about 30% Trump. So, just an interesting perspective, given how pro-Israel and how many big moves President Trump has taken for Israel, moving the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, keeping a promise of a law that's more than 25 years old in the United States, but hadn't been acted on by any American president of either party. Trump, of course, also acknowledged, recognized Israel's sovereign claim over the Golan Heights up near Syria. Israel has, sold F-35, the most advanced fighter jet in the world, to Israel. Has helped Israel now broker not just one, but two Arab-Israeli peace treaties, the first and second that we've had in more than 25 years.
Yes.
These, of course, are the Abraham Accords with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. I had the great honor of being at the White House a few weeks back for the signing of the Abraham Accords. So there's been a lot of things that Trump has done that has been very pro-Israel, and that's where we are. That's where we are. Though the biggest issue in our minds right now here in Israel is the fact that COVID has been a very, very serious problem here in Israel.
Very true.
The country's been under national lockdown for a second time. We're the only country in the world that went into second lockdown. Starting to ease up a little bit now. Things are getting a little bit better, but it's been a very hard year.
I might just mention, too, last time we had you on, you were going to be sequestered in your bedroom, so that was the case. But when you weren't here last time, we did mention that we have the All Israel News, and it's allisrael.com. And it is something you've started to track news and events impacting Israel and the Middle East. We'll also talk about the Arab one in just a minute. But again, this is something that we have linked on our website, the allisrael.com or All Israel News, and you can find all sorts of great information. And even though we didn't have you here last time, we were talking about the fact that, indeed, moving the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, but more importantly, really the second biggest, if you will, treaty between Israel and other countries. You can think about Jimmy Carter and Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat, and, of course, this one now with the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. If it weren't for the bias against Donald Trump, I think he might have actually been able to receive the Nobel Peace Prize. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, it was amazing that that prize was just awarded, and he didn't win, and nor did Prime Minister Netanyahu or the Crown Prince of the UAE or the King of Bahrain. This is a huge moment in this region and this world, and Christians have been praying for the peace of Jerusalem for decades, and this is the first time we've seen these peace treaties since, as you mentioned, the Egyptian peace treaty with Israel in 1979, and then the Israeli-Jordanian peace treaty in 1994. Interestingly, Kerby, both of those treaties were negotiated by a Democrat American president, Jimmy Carter, you mentioned the first time, and Bill Clinton the second. This is the first two treaties that a Republican president has actually helped Israel and her Arab neighbors negotiate. And it's a huge deal. The Israeli parliament, known as the Knesset, just fully ratified the deal a few days ago. The Bahraini government just welcomed an Israeli delegation to Bahrain in the last 48 hours to sign a more detailed version of the initial treaty that had been sketched out at the White House Abraham Accords signing. So here it's huge news in the region. There's talk that Sudan may be the next country to make peace with Israel. There's been movements, and we've been reporting about it for the last few days. These are big decisions for countries that have either been at war or at least hostile to Israel at the UN, with economic boycotts, with sanctions against Israel, with participating in political maneuvers to isolate and condemn Israel at every turn. And so for these Arab countries to be making these changes with, honestly, I mean, to be, look, I was a never Trumper once. I still have some issues with the president with his tweets, with his terrible debate performance. But I have come to really appreciate the president's ability to make deals that benefit the American people, whether it's Arab-Israeli peace deals, which no one else has been able to do for a generation.
Yes.
That's a pretty big deal. But also trade deals and tax cut deals and deals in the Senate to push through 2 and almost now 3 pro-life justices. Amazing.
We're going to take a break, continue our conversation, get something to write with. We'll talk about all Israel news, all Arab news, right after this.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes, and we are privileged to have with us today Joel Rosenberg. And let me just mention, I encourage you to get something to write with, because Joel Rosenberg has really helped us deal with this issue of fake news, or in some cases, news that just never gets reported. And first of all, there is the All Israel News, and it's allisrael.com. So you can go to allisrael.com. We already have those links up there, but I think we'll have to freshen them up for today. And then the All Arab News, and that's allarab.news is the way to find that one. And sometimes people say, where do you get your ideas? Well, I did not know about the possibility that Sudan could eventually maybe make peace with Israel until I read it on All Arab News, which is something that Joel Rosenberg has posted. And I noticed lately you've been posting, Joel, about one of the individuals that you are really encouraging people to pray for, who is an official that is battling COVID. So again, these are the kinds of things that people will find when they go to All Israel News and All Arab News, right?
That's right. We are trying to cover news that is getting very little attention, particularly for evangelicals all over the world who are, who love Israel, who care about Israel, who pray for Israel, but aren't sure where to find credible information, the latest information, and as well as analysis. What's happening and why does it matter? Why should I care about it? And there's so much fake news. There's so much bias. There's so much hostility in the media, or as you mentioned, sometimes the media it's what I'd call a soft bias. They don't care in the media about what we care about. They wouldn't think something was important, and we would. So we're doing original reporting, exclusive interviews, as well as linking to the most important, credible stories in the Israeli media, the Arab media, the international media, and it's one-stop shopping. You don't have to sift through dozens of websites and try to figure out what's true, what's important. Just go to the All Israel News or All Arab News sites. I know people joke and they say, well, you say it's one-stop shopping. Why do you have two websites? Well, the reason is because there are many Arab Christians as well as Arab Muslims who are willing to be interviewed by me and covered by our website, but they don't want to be written about on All Israel News. It's just a bridge too far. It's too sensitive in their communities. So that's why we created All Arab News, so we could. And it's almost like saying it's the next page in the newspaper. Like in the old days, right? You have the local section, you have international, you have sports, you have features, but the two sites are cross-linked. And you mentioned something specific. Let's just give an example of prayer requests. So the leading Arab Protestant evangelical Christian in the entire region is a dear friend of mine, Dr. Andrea Zaki. He's the head of all the Protestants of Egypt. He himself is Egyptian. Well, he and his entire family have been contracted COVID, and it's been a challenge for them over these last few weeks. We're the only outlet that I'm aware of that has reported that news.
Right.
And we've been asking Christians all over the world to be praying for him. He is starting to make some improvement, but it's going to take some time. Likewise, the chief Palestinian negotiator, an Arab Muslim who many people who love Israel would be very frustrated with and have because he's very hostile to Israel and people who love Israel. But he's my neighbor. He lives in Jericho. I live in Jerusalem. He had lung transplants a couple of years ago. He is battling COVID. He's in a coma right now, critical condition. Actually was moved to an Israeli hospital because the Palestinian hospitals weren't doing a good enough job to take care of him. So somebody who's very hostile to Israel, but being cared for right now in an Israeli hospital. And so we are covering that story and updating it and asking people to pray. That's Saev Erakat. You don't have to agree with a person to still love them and be praying for them and for their family.
Let me just mention again, as you go to allisrael.com, you've got the COVID tracker. You have a whole section on tourism, which I know people are going to want to follow because we just sent out a mailing talking about our next trip, which isn't until June, and we hope that things will change there because probably one of the busiest weeks in the year during Sukkot, you didn't have many foreign and domestic tourists, so we need to certainly turn that around for Israel. So again,
we want you to come, and we want to interview you when you're here.
But the bottom line is I wanted people to know, since we missed you the other day, that it's allisrael.com and allarab.news. And actually, one can link you to the other if you want. And, of course, if you simply go to the website for Joel Rosenberg, you'll find that. And, of course, all sorts of great material. And so I appreciate the kind of work that you're doing to try to bring this kind of news and information to all of our listeners. And I appreciate you giving us some time today here on Point of View.
Well, it's great to be with you, Kerby. And also, if people follow me on Twitter, they'll also pick up on what our Twitter feeds are, and hopefully that will be helpful as well. Great to be with you guys. Thank you for praying for the peace of Jerusalem and for the health of our country and our neighbors as well, Kerby. We love you guys and grateful for your audience.
I just mentioned I still have some copies of Joel Rosenberg's latest novel, and you can find out more by contacting us at Point of View. Jerusalem Assassin, I think you'll appreciate that. And those are great resources indeed. Again, I didn't know I was going to be talking to Joel, but that was great. And I was just trying to give you a little bit of a sense about this man, Robert Cahaly, who actually is the pollster for the Trafalgar Group. And he was accurate in 2016, and at least in the Florida election was accurate in 2018. But he is an outlier, and he actually is convinced that Trump might actually be winning and might actually be ahead and could actually win by 270, 280 electoral votes. You need 270 to win. And that's very different than what Charlie Cook and some of them are saying, that Biden doesn't even have to win any of these battleground states and still will come up with 290 electoral votes. So somebody after the election on November 3rd, and I'm not sure we're going to know on the night of November 3rd who won, but somebody is going to be embarrassed because we have very different polls in that regard. And that's why sometimes I say don't pay attention to the polls, vote your conscience. And take the time to really educate yourself about those issues. One of the reasons why we have a link to iVoter.com, all of that material is on our website, and you can scroll down and find that. The iVoter Guide is there. It's now being made available for virtually every state in which we broadcast, and that is the case. And there are some things I kind of shoved aside so we could get Joel Rosenberg in, but when we come back from the break, we're going to be talking with our good friend, Dr. Frank Wright. Been really in ministry for a third of a century and is the president and CEO of D. James Kennedy Ministries. They have put together a great video, which we have a link to on the website. It's going to take you about a half an hour if you want to watch the video on George Soros. There is a book that goes with it as well, some great resources. And so a lot of you have said, can you do kind of an investigative story on George Soros? Well, I don't need to because I think our friends at D. James Kennedy Ministry has done that. So we'll educate you about George Soros and the latest stories associated with him and the election. Then after we're done with Frank Wright, we'll get back into some of these other issues. What about the Hunter emails? Were they hacked? No, they weren't. What about some of the comments from the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe, who's saying it was not a Russian disinformation campaign? What about Amy Coney Barrett? Many people think she might be an antidote to our culture of contempt. And, well, then are we going to have people try to pack the Supreme Court? Well, Marco Rubio, senator from Florida, said, oh, that was in the plans a long time ago, as illustrated by the fact that he's yet to get one Democratic senator to co-sponsor this constitutional amendment to limit the Supreme Court to 9 justices. So, as you can see, we have a lot to cover, and we will do our best in the next hour to try to cover as much of that as we can. And if we don't get to it all on Tuesday, there's always Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. So let's take a break, and you can find some great material on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be back right after this.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/sign-up. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/sign-up. pointofview.net/sign-up. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View,
and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
This hour we're going to spend some time talking about George Soros, and many of you have said, well, I'd really like you to do kind of an investigative report on them and some of the various organizations associated with George Soros and the Open Society program and all of the rest, and try to link these various groups, but no need to do so because our good friends at D. James Kennedy Ministries have already done so. And so we have a link to the video that you can watch. Also, some great resources there. George Soros Exposed. There's also a follow the money chart and a number of other things that I think you're going to benefit from. And so we thought just to really kind of educate you about this and really encourage you to get more information, we wanted to go to our good friend, Dr. Frank Wright. He is the president and CEO of D. James Kennedy Ministries. He's been involved in that ministry for about a third of a century. Before that was with the D. James Kennedy Center for Christian Statesmanship, and of course has been on the senior staff of Coral Ridge Presbyterian Church. Individual that has worked on Capitol Hill, has an earned doctorate from Florida Atlantic University. And Frank Wright, just always great to have you on the program.
Well, Kerby, it's great to hear your voice, my friend. Thanks for having me on.
Might also mention you were the president and CEO of the National Religious Broadcasters, and following your career is really amazing to me. But let's, if we can, get into this research that you have done. And I might give you credit as well as Jerry Newcomb, who's been on the program with us before, John Rabe, and a number of others, because you've taken the different aspects of George Soros and talked about his attempt to try to remake America. But give us some background, because even though we have talked about him in the past, I suspect we may have some listeners that say, okay, I've heard the name George Soros, but I don't know much about him. What should we tell them about him?
Well, Kerby, perhaps the title of our TV special that we produced says it best. The title is Billionaire Radical: George Soros and the Scheme to Remake America. He is a left-wing, a thoroughly left-wing individual, powerful, wealthy, influential, and has said that the demise of America is his goal. He believes America is a force for evil in the world, even though he has lived here as a citizen for many, many years. He is someone whose threat to or his engagement in the public policy issues and also in election campaigns is a direct threat to freedom, certainly to Republican democracy, Republican, of course, being with a small r, as you've explained many times, and to religious freedom. He's himself an atheist and fabulously wealthy. He ranks something like 150 or so on the Forbes list of the wealthiest people in America. And he has put his money where his mouth is, Kerby. He's transferred over $18 billion of his fortune to his Open Society Foundation, and some say his lifetime giving to left-wing causes here and around the world might be upwards of $32 billion.
Wow.
And he is seen by many as the architect and even the guiding genius of what people like David Horowitz and Richard Poe call the shadow party. Not really part of the Democrat Party. Right now, this shadow party is leading the Democrats by the nose. And he is giving away at least $1 billion annually through his Open Society Foundation. And if you look at our Follow the Money chart that you kindly referred to, you will see that the tentacles of Soros reach probably every left-wing organization you could name. And sadly, Kerby, I hope we'll talk about this on another program, sadly, his tentacles reach into the left-wing evangelical church as well.
And I was going to mention that because, first of all, as you look at that chart, you're going to say, okay, I have some of these I know, ACLU, Planned Parenthood. Of course, you know only so well the Southern Poverty Law Center because it...
I've heard of them.
Yeah, it labels various groups, a lot of our friends, as hate groups, which is just terrible because it's not appropriate at all. But then you see a lot of these other groups and you go... Well, that's isn't that a Christian group? Isn't that one in a church? And so in some respects, this goes more than you might imagine. I mean, after all, he's an atheist, and maybe you could explain that, Frank, since you brought it up. Because why would an atheist give to Christian groups? Because they're pushing a common agenda, and so some of these liberal ecumenical groups that present themselves as Christian aren't really all that Christian, but nevertheless are using that to advance an agenda that is, again, attempting to transform America.
Well, that's exactly right. And the reason George Soros is interested in the left-wing portion of the evangelical church, if we want to be kind to speak of it that way, is because he uses them as a voice to support his radical leftist policies. So when they roll out something or support something, they can find someone from one of these left-wing evangelical organizations who will stand up and say, well, I'm an evangelical and I support this idea of open borders, no immigration restrictions at all. Anybody that can find their way into your country, they should have a right to vote immediately upon arrival. And quite frankly, some of the evangelical groups that are listed on our chart are people that you and I are very familiar with. They're fairly well known. And the documentation is clear. They've taken money from Soros for a variety of reasons. Someone did some wonderful undercover camera work. It wasn't really us, Kerby, but someone captured someone from the progressive movement. Let's just say someone from the hard left of the progressive movement in an interview and said, well, how do you get these evangelicals to support you? And she laughs and says, well, we just rent them. We can rent an evangelical. That was the title of this video that I saw. And so sadly, some of these left-wing, supposedly evangelical organizations are really, hired guns. They're for sale. He rolls them out when he wants a good word said about his next radical policy endeavor.
So again, some of the issues that you have been working against, we have been talking about for actually decades, are actually being pushed forward with that kind of money. So I want to take a break, and when we come back, I thought I would pick out just one or two of the really great insights from your video. One of those from our good friend Jerry Newcomb about the plight of Mark and Patricia McCloskey. Now, some of you might remember them because those are the individuals who, as some of the Antifa and Black Lives Matter individuals came onto their property, showed up with AR-15 and a handgun, didn't handle them exactly the way you're supposed to be taught when you go to maybe a class on gun safety. But nevertheless, you are actually having these individuals trying to defend their property by just showing their weapons. They didn't fire them, anything like that. And then when it came time for the district attorney to actually charge someone, did they charge any of the people that came onto the property? Well, you know the answer to that. No. Who did they charge? Mark and Patricia McCloskey, and not necessarily fans of the Republican Party, but they showed up in an interview at the Republican National Convention because I think they began to realize, there's one side that actually might support the Second Amendment and one that might oppose it. When we come back, I think Frank Wright's got some great information because the individual that was bringing those charges supported by George Soros money. So that's just one of the many incredible insights in the video. So we'll come back and talk with Dr. Frank Wright. By the way, if you've got a question, 1-800-351-1212. We're talking about George Soros. We'll continue right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
The charge from liberal professors and progressive activists is that this country and this president are racist. This prevents non-white minorities from experiencing true economic opportunity. Minorities face economic discrimination. Stephen Moore is a finance and economics columnist who pulled together the latest Census Bureau reports to show how well minorities have been doing. Some of that has been hard to see of late because of the economic downturn created by the pandemic lockdowns. The Census Bureau reports that from 2016 to 2019, black incomes rose more than in any 3 years in the history of this country. Also, black poverty rates fell to their lowest level ever recorded. It might surprise you to learn that the highest income group in America are Asians. The median family income of Asian Americans is $98,000. How did Asians, many from Japan, Korea, India, China, and Taiwan, achieve this level? He suggests it could be that they have a stronger work ethic. Maybe they are more likely to go into occupations like science, engineering, or medicine with higher salaries. He says, who knows? The point he's making is this is not what you would expect from a country that discriminates against non-white citizens. It is not what you would find in a xenophobic society. What about other minorities? The average Hispanic household makes $56,000. He agrees that this is not rich, but it is a massive leap forward from what Hispanics earn in Mexico, El Salvador, or Cuba. He also documents the gains Latinos have made in the last 3 years. Economic opportunity is only one factor, but it is an important one that is rarely mentioned when the charge of racism against minorities is cited. These facts about median household income deserve to be considered. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kerby's booklet, A Biblical View on Loneliness, go to viewpoints.info/loneliness. That's viewpoints.info/loneliness.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
We have Dr. Frank Wright with us for a few more minutes. By the way, if you want to ask a question or make a comment about George Soros, 1-800-351-1212. Then we're going to move on to some other topics. But first of all, I thought I would use one of the many great illustrations in the video, Frank Wright, that you have put together there at D. James Kennedy Ministries. And that was, of course, the story of Mark and Patricia McCloskey, who actually were trying to defend their property. You can see the broken down gate. You can see what they did. And of course, the rest of the story is that none of those people that essentially trespassed on their land and could have maybe even come after them if they had not shown their guns, none of them were charged, but the McCloskeys were charged with one felony count, the unlawful use of a weapon. They appeared in an Associate Circuit Court judge's court and pled not guilty, but you can see in some respects they were singled out. And am I correct in saying that they were singled out by an individual that actually won election because of George Soros money?
Well, she certainly did receive a great deal of money from George Soros for her campaign. And George Soros also invested in another couple of dozen prosecutors around the country in their political campaigns. And you have to ask the question, well, why prosecutors? Why would he invest money there? Well, and by the way, you could actually look at that list of prosecutors and have predicted where all the violence, which cities the violence would have taken place in this summer, because they carefully picked certain cities where the prosecutor would be lenient. People that were arrested and brought in by the police, no bail or very low bail. Convicted criminals with outstanding warrants, no bail, turned loose again. So what George Soros is doing, if you look at his so-called values, the values of the open society, they include everything from abortion and LGBTQ activism, open borders, as we've mentioned, euthanasia, legalization of prostitution and drugs, judicial reform, assaulting the Second Amendment, defunding the police, and so on. That if you look at that list, then you can understand why he would like to have prosecutors who see things his way. It's almost, Kerby, like you and I have talked before, I think, about John Calvin's idea of the lesser magistrates.
Mm-hmm.
When you have a tyrannical ruler, we have to count on the lesser magistrates to enforce justice by not, in some cases, prosecuting unjust laws. This is sort of the flip side of the lesser magistrate. It's the corrupt lesser magistrate. George Soros funds their campaigns to have influence over them naturally, and to get them to turn a blind eye towards when it comes to prosecuting crimes that George Soros would like to see ignored.
Let me, before we get back to the video, just pick up on that for just a minute, because Frank Wright, you and I have talked about before that we really want to educate Christians to be good stewards of their vote, and also to go all the way down the ballot. And I dare say that there are probably some listeners here that if you asked them a year ago who their mayor was, or more importantly, who their county judge was, they probably said, I don't know. And yet, have we not noticed during this pandemic and the lockdown how, in some respects, your local mayor, your county judge, or a variety of other individuals that you could vote in or out of office so affected your life? And so it illustrates, again, the point you make, and that is we sometimes focus on who's the president, maybe even who's running for Senate. We got 35 Senate races, maybe even our House of Representatives, 435 races for the House of Representatives, but you work down to the state representative or the state senator, the mayor, the city council, even your county judge. We don't pay attention, and those people have affected our lives dramatically this year, haven't they?
Indeed so. And Kerby, I suspect you're much like me, probably way more so. When elections roll around, your friends all call you up and say, Kerby, how should I vote on this?
Yes.
Or which person should I support? And I get the same thing, but I will tell you, it's never been easier to research the answer to that question. Every candidate that you can find listed on your ballot, you could also drop into a search engine, whether it's DuckDuckGo or Google or whatever, put their name in, and you can very easily find out information about them, and most importantly, who they're connected to and where they've served before. So we live in a time, by the grace of God, when it's easier now to research the ballot that you're going to cast than it's ever been before. But as you say, Kerby, it's rightly so. Think about it this way. If you look at a collection of people at the highest level of government and you see them as problematic today, they started down at this lowest level of government that is often ignored. So by all means, we should be good stewards of our responsibility to vote by investigating each candidate.
Well, again, we encourage you to get some of that information. We have the iVoter Guide on our website, but we also have a link right now to Radical George Soros Exposed. And let's, if we can, talk about this. We're sending everybody just to your website. They can go to our website to find your website, or you can simply go to djameskennedy.org, either way. But you will find some great resources. And first of all, I was so impressed by the Follow the Money chart. But then you also have a guide as well on, George Soros Exposed, Radical George Soros, and the scheme to remake America. So there's a video, there's some books, there's some charts. Talk about what's available, because we, as I said before, didn't need to reinvent the wheel. You've done such a good job of giving that expose. What can people find when they land on your website?
Well, Kerby, thanks for those kind words. One of my favorite expressions is, half of everything you see on the internet is not true, signed Abraham Lincoln. And we did not want to be guilty of that, of peddling internet rumors or half-truths. So we commissioned a research project using some fairly well-known people and some who are excellent researchers or a little bit less known, so that we could document every name on that Follow the Money chart. Every person on there is on there because we've been able to document And by the way, the WikiLeaks troubles that some people have had over the years, George Soros had a whole batch of his information appear through WikiLeaks, and that's actually how we found out about some of the left-wing evangelicals. But anyway, we have thoroughly researched this, and the chart shows in its outer reaches all the money sources, Soros being the biggest, but he leads these other foundations by the nose. He's very, very influential. So you've got the Ford Foundation and the McClellan Foundation and MacArthur Foundation, and many of these foundations were historically started by conservatives. But over time, their boards were taken over by left-wing people, and today, Henry Ford would be spinning in his grave like a camshaft if he knew what the Ford Foundation was doing with the fortune that he had built. And so we created these resources to trace the money flow, and then the book, George Soros Exposed, is to help people see him a little more clearly. Many people don't get to the bottom of Soros. Steve Croft at 60 Minutes did some years ago. He started asking him questions about his faith. And Soros, who claims to be an atheist, we must say is someone who also has a very lofty self-regard, because he once said, "I fancied myself as some kind of God. If truth be known, I carried some rather potent messianic fantasies with me from childhood, which I felt I had to control." And then later he said, it's like a disease when you consider yourself some kind of a God, the creator of everything. But I feel comfortable about it now since I began to live it out. So here is a man who's devoted to left-wing causes and the usurpation of constitutional authority in America and so many other things, but he is also a seriously confused individual. His personal goal in life, he said, is to become the conscience of the world.
Yes.
He wants to be the conscience of the world. That's the kind of language that, as Marty Croft, as 60 Minutes asked him, that's the kind of language that can get you a 2 or 3 year stint on a psychiatric couch. But this is how Soros sees himself. He even said, using a phrase that historians have used before, he said, the arc of history doesn't follow its own course. It needs to be bent. And I am really engaged in trying to bend it in the quote-unquote right direction. So Soros is a figure with resources and influence, but he's a very scary figure, too.
Yes, man. Again, watch the video. And again, you have some clips from 60 Minutes and a variety of other things, as well as the investigative reports. So, Dr. Frank Wright, it's always great to have you on the program. And I want to point people to your website to get as much information that they would like to get from about George Soros. And thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Thanks, Kerby. Thanks for having me on.
We are going to take a break. I'll take some phone calls in this last half hour, 1-800-351-1212. But many of you have said, well, what about this guy, George Soros? I mean, can we learn more about him? Well, of course, it's a matter of public record, by the way. And we'll take some calls about that if you'd like to join us. And I also have posted a couple of very good articles that you might want to find. What about those emails from the New York Post? We'll talk about that right after this.
2020. It's been a pretty eventful year. We've experienced international tensions over the coronavirus and lockdowns, economic uncertainties, cities overrun by protests, rioting, and looters, and coming soon, a presidential election. Question: where will you get real news, credible opinion, clear biblical thinking on the things that matter most? Answer: Point of View Radio with Kerby Anderson and the team. You can make sure their voices continue speaking loud and clear by taking a moment right now and joining the Truth Team. It is easy, but you do have to visit our website or make a quick call. Go to pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. You have the power to make a difference. Joining the Truth Team can help ensure that millions of people will get a different opinion from the major purveyors of fake news. We don't get big advertising dollars like the networks or tax money like PBS. We depend on you. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Time to laugh hour. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let's go to Arizona first. KNLB, Michael, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
I'm listening to this with absolute horror. I'm a Christian activist, okay? I do not understand. Is this man being investigated by the CIA or the FBI or anybody?
Most of the time, you don't even get to talk about it.
Loose?
You know, when I was talking about the other day that when, Newt Gingrich was on even talking about Soros and some of that, at one point he got cut off even on Fox News. So one of the reasons I want to cover this is because a lot of people maybe haven't heard much about it. Now, is he free to give his money? Yeah, he's free to give his money. And where he gives his money, I think, is probably the most significant aspect of that, because some of the organizations that oftentimes we talk about here on Point of View are some of the beneficiaries of it. But I go to Hungary every year, and there they even have I think it was like a Stop Soros law, because they actually just called it that because they were dealing with the issue of illegal immigration. But nevertheless, there are a lot of people that simply say, oh, George Soros, he's just the boogeyman for the Christian right or for the far right or whatever. I've seen some of those articles as well. So he doesn't get a lot of press. A lot of people probably don't even know about him. That's one of the reasons why I thought at least I'd let you know that there is a video that kind of does an investigative report. Let me take a few other phone calls if I can real quickly. Let's go to Arizona. Justin, thank you for joining us today. What's your comment for us today?
Yeah, so a couple items here. So one, I'm a fan of George Soros and his anti-authoritarian donations to many different organizations. It's not only as far as the leftist donations or liberal donations. A lot of his donations go into anti-authoritarian aspects of different political parties in different countries and support for getting people out to vote. So we're first and foremost a democracy in this country, a democratic republic, but we're a democracy where everybody's vote should count and everyone should have the opportunity to vote. So I know he's put in a lot of money into allowing people to vote. I think a lot of what's said in the video and what's in the doctor's book seems to be leave out the good charity he does, and it seems to make him into some kind of boogeyman. And if you Google George Soros anti-Semitic, you'll find that there's a lot of anti-Semitic attacks from white supremacists mostly on George Soros, and the right has grabbed a hold of that. And they really need to not only look for the truth of George Soros, of the good he does and the supposed quote-unquote bad he does with his donations, and really got to dig into things.
Yeah, and again, one of the things I would say, Justin, is, around this table, groups like the ACLU, Planned Parenthood, and others are really of great concern to us. So, again, I'll be the first to admit that anybody that is a philanthropist can certainly be giving to possible organizations that advance whatever that issue might be. But again, the concern that I have is where a lot of that money goes to organizations that we really try to stand up against here on Point of View. So I appreciate that. Even when you talk about voting, some of this gets back to whether or not we should have a very important voting system where we have voter integrity, or whether we're going to move into some of the things I talked about earlier with what was happening with vote harvesting and the rest. So I appreciate your comments, and if nothing else, I wanted to try to answer the questions that so many people have about George Soros. And if you'd like to watch the video, like to get the book, that's why we wanted to cover that today. Let me mention tomorrow, before we get into some of these other news items, that certainly one of the things that we are going to be talking about tomorrow is a book that's come out about the kind of the panic panic that was created with the pandemic. And so we'll be talking with Dr. Jay Richards about that. On Thursday, we also will be talking with Doug Groteis. Dr. Doug Groteis has been on the program with us many times before. And in this particular case, he took the time to kind of write a very good piece that does a good critique, I think, of the issue of critical race theory. We've heard so much about this, and we've heard the president even ask about it in the debate. Might even show up again on the Thursday night presidential debate. So I thought we would cover some of that as well. So lots of controversial issues we'll be covering over the next couple of days. But let me get into a couple of the pieces that I've posted for you real quickly. And the first one is because of the story that came out of the New York Post. And I guess I should say stories, because one came out Wednesday, another one came out Thursday, and all the rest. There have been a lot of claims being made, and so I posted you a couple of articles so that you can kind of dig into it a little bit more. Matt Vesta says, first of all, these emails were not hacked. Hunter Biden forgot to pick up his MacBook Pro, he says, that contained a number of these sensitive emails about the family business, the Biden family business. It shows that at the very least, Joe Biden knew about Hunter's business deals, despite some of the previous denials. We'll see if it comes up on Thursday night's presidential debate. But the point is, this goes into some detail, that the computer was left off for repairs in Delaware, April of 2019, never picked up. The owner finally looked at it because he was wondering if he had something that was maybe illegal or questionable. Then decided to copy the hard drive, gave one of the duplicates to the lawyer for Rudy Giuliani. Actually, the hard drive is in possession of the FBI. And the point I'm making is, first of all, there was no hack. But there's another question that is surfaced, and that is, as Matt Vesta points out here, there also was not Russian misinformation, because that's the argument being used right now. And I thought it was kind of interesting in the Matt Vesta piece, he's quoting from a number of pieces by Michael Tracy, who was questioning a number of statements being made by Adam Schiff. He says, I don't know if Radcliffe is credible on this issue, and by that he means, and I'll talk about this in a minute, the Director of National Intelligence, John Ratcliffe. But he says, still think Adam Schiff is remotely credible on anything involving Russia. You immediately need to check into, he says, your nearest mental institution. And then talked about a number of people that were just kind of claiming that this was nothing more than disinformation. One of the things he says, and you can read this in its entirety, what's funny is the claims of disinformation nowadays are usually themselves disinformation. An interesting and effective propagandist inversion, which is easy enough to pull off when most of the media class does nothing but regurgitate evidence-free assertions. And what he's getting into is a piece that came out yesterday by the Director of National Intelligence. That would be the former member of Congress here in Texas, John Ratcliffe. You might know that the Director of National Intelligence, the office, was sort of created to try to pull together these various intelligence agencies. And yesterday, he made the claim that Hunter Biden's laptop and emails were not part of some Russian disinformation campaign. When he appeared on, was it Fox Business, he says, it's funny that some of the people who complain the most about intelligence being politicized are the ones politicizing the intelligence. Unfortunately, it is Adam Schiff who said the Intelligence Committee believes that the Hunter Biden laptop and emails are part of a Russian disinformation campaign. So he continued by saying, let me be clear. The intelligence community doesn't believe that because there is no intelligence that supports that. And we have shared no intelligence with Adam Schiff or any member of Congress. Now, at this point, you have a clear disagreement. Either you've got to believe that the Director of National Intelligence, former Congressman John Ratcliffe, is not telling the truth about the fact that the Intelligence Committee does not believe that this came from Russian disinformation, and that he's also not telling the truth about not sharing any of that with Adam Schiff or any member of Congress. Or you've got to assume that maybe Adam Schiff was saying something that cannot be verified and was simply said as one more excuse for not paying attention to some of the material that came out from the New York Post. So, nevertheless, that's where we find ourselves at this point, but I've posted that article for you to find in case you're interested that the emails were not hacked. That is one of the stories being told. And when we come back from the break, I want to get into another issue because we are moving closer to the first vote that will take place on Thursday. This will be in the Senate Judiciary Committee for the vote up or down for the confirmation of Amy Coney Barrett. And I have a very good piece by Catherine Jean Lopez. Amy Barrett is an antidote to our culture of contempt. So I think we might talk about that for just a minute. And I've posted a very good piece that came out on the bias of the American left. Won't get to that today because we had a surprise visit from Joel Rosenberg, but it is a very good piece by Victor Davis Hanson. Maybe tomorrow we'll get into that in a little more detail, but if nothing else, I think it's a good illustration of some of the kinds of things that perhaps need to be said. And if nothing else, it's quite possible that Amy Coney Barrett might end up being a very well-admired individual. And we talked about that the other day with Kelly Shackelford. So we'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Now, back to Point of View.
your listener-supported source for truth.
For a few more minutes, let me just mention that one of the books we've really enjoyed is an interview we've done with Arthur Brooks, and the book is entitled Love Your Enemies, and the subtitle is How Decent People Can Save America from the Culture of Contempt. And one of the real concerns we have during a politicized political season and during this election season is that very significant issue of contempt. And so I was struck by the fact that Catherine Jean Lopez wrote a piece, which is the second article we've posted here. Amy Barrett is an antidote to our culture of contempt. And she actually starts out by quoting from Senator Cory Booker, who actually is a Democrat from New Jersey, in which he was actually saying that someone came up to him and said, "Dude, I want you to punch Donald Trump in the face." Well, the senator from New Jersey actually said, "Dude, that's a felony." And that's how Senator Booker described his response. And again, Catherine Jean Lopez said, "Good for him, fighting against our crazed political culture of anger, contempt, and even violence." And the point she's making is that maybe we just need to find more and more positive role models, and suggest that maybe one of those may be indeed Judge Amy Coney Barrett, who might ultimately become Justice Amy Coney Barrett. And she says she, in some respects, was thinking about, should the Republicans hold off the vote, largely because she thinks actually Amy Coney Barrett may be the best thing that has happened to American politics in a long time. But nevertheless, she says Washington needs her, but America needs her. She goes on to say she embodies a grace in a lot of ways in her public witness. Listening to her in some of the exchanges was a civics lesson, when it wasn't insane, to borrow the word of Peggy Noonan, a Pulitzer Prize winner speechwriter for President Ronald Reagan, about the state of the nation's capital today. And he said, "We do mean insane. I'd walk away from the hearings, come back and find a senator asking about whether Barrett had ever sexually harassed someone." And she says, "What? Where did that come from?" Well, it turns out that senator actually asked that question quite often, we found out. But nevertheless, it's just illustrating, again, how some of these comments are being made time and time again. And if nothing else, she said these were kind of flashbacks to some of the things that were actually said to Brett Kavanaugh and all the rest. But anyway, she goes on to say that last year, Arthur Brooks diagnosed what's ailing American politics. And the quote is, according to Arthur Brooks, "America is addicted to political contempt. While most of us hate what it is doing to our country and worry about how contempt coarsens our culture over the long term, many of us still compulsively consume the ideological equivalent of meth from elected officials, academics, entertainers, and some of the news media." Goes on to go and gives the quote for some time, but I think it is a good illustration of that. And Arthur Brooks really argues that contempt is impractical, and it's really bad for a country dependent on people working together in politics, communities, and the economy. Unless we hope to become a one-party state, I don't want that, we cannot afford contempt for our fellow Americans who simply disagree with us. So if nothing else, it's just an illustration of one of the issues that we really need to address on a very significant basis. And if nothing else, I've always appreciated Arthur Brooks. I mean, we've interviewed him before when he was with the University of Syracuse. Of course, he's been with the American Enterprise Institute. Now he's doing some other things as well. I love what Jonah Goldberg said, too. Arthur Brooks is a strange creature in Washington standards. Heck, he's a strange creature by bipedal standards. A former French horn player who decided to be an egghead late in life. He's a unique mixture of Catholic piety, data obsession, sartorial connoisseurism, physical fitness, old soul wisdom, and basic decency. But if nothing else, I appreciate not only that comment, but from Senator Ben Sass and others, talking about kind of this toxic culture that we find ourselves in. And if nothing else, maybe Amy Coney Barrett, if indeed she's confirmed, certainly could be a very positive role model. And that was something we heard Kelly Shackelford talking about on Friday in terms of the response from his daughter about watching the testimony of Judge Barrett. That brings us to the other issue I thought I might address. And that is a piece by Senator Marco Rubio, who was arguing that you hear everybody saying that if indeed the Republicans confirm Amy Coney Barrett, that will give Democrats a justification for packing the Supreme Court. And Senator Marco Rubio, in a piece, actually said this has always been their plan, to pack the Supreme Court with liberal judges. He says this isn't about Amy Coney Barrett or Justice Neil Gorsuch or Justice Brett Kavanaugh. He says the truth is that these have been in the works since Donald Trump was elected president of the United States 4 years ago. And the argument he makes, which I thought was pretty compelling, is back in March a year ago. So that'd be March 2019. He and several Republican colleagues proposed a constitutional amendment that would limit the Supreme Court to 9 justices. In his piece, he said, "It is telling that no Democratic senator has co-sponsored my constitutional amendment, which would merely keep the Supreme Court at the same number of seats it has had since 1869. Which I think illustrates again that the possibility of making this, what would it be, the 28th Amendment, I believe, probably not going to happen because, again, Constitution 101. In order to add an amendment to the Constitution, you need 2/3 of the House, 2/3 of the Senate, 3/4 of the legislature. Not going to happen. It doesn't look like any time soon. But his argument is, that is the argument from Senator Marco Rubio, is this is more about our institutions. It is about what happens to our country, what happens to our communities and our way of life if, as he said, the radical left and the Democratic Party destroy them. It is clear they don't want to pack the Supreme Court just to cancel out the votes of Justices Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, Neil Gorsuch, or Brett Kavanaugh, and soon maybe Amy Coney Barrett. They want to pack the court to cancel out our ability to resist their radical agenda, he says. He says our founders, talking about radical, our founders believed in a radical idea that all men are created equal and that their rights come from God, from our Creator. That idea, the very premise of our nation's founding, is increasingly, he says, under assault from the left. They would have you believe that America and its founding is irredeemably racist and that nothing short of a revolution is acceptable. He goes on to say that if Lex succeeds in packing the Supreme Court, they will be one step closer to erasing our founding and our values in pursuit of progressive utopias. I love this line, like Seattle's Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone, or CHAZ. So anyway, that is, again, the next step. And it is one point that is being made, that whether or not the current presidential candidate for the Democrats, former Vice President Joe Biden, whether he says he will or will not pack the court, I think there'll be so much pressure, if indeed he is elected, to actually start down that process. And that's why Marco Rubio says it has very little to do with the decision either to confirm or not to confirm Amy Coney Barrett. This has been in the works for some time. That's all we have for today. Let me just mention that tomorrow we're going to spend some time, first of all, talking about marriage and getting into some really important questions that I think you will appreciate there. And then we'll spend some time with Dr. Jay Richards talking about this pandemic and some of the panic that was created around that, some of the questions that maybe now have surfaced in a book that they have written at the Discovery Institute. So I hope you'll appreciate that conversation. And if nothing else, I encourage you to go to the website today if you want more information about the book by Scotty Smith, the information by Dr. Frank Wright. It's all available at our website, pointofview.net. Also talked about the fact that you need to be educated about how you're going to vote. We have the link to the iVoter Guide, and you can use that effectively as well as you cast your vote. I want to thank Andrew for his help behind the scenes, as well as Steve, and we'll see you back here tomorrow on Point of View.
Having civil conversations about important issues seems to be harder and harder. Various media outlets tell people what they should believe, why they should be outraged, and getting people to actually think, well, it can be difficult. Whether it's the gospel, tax issues, social policy, or just about anything else, you need to have solid information and clear thinking to address the hard issues. You need God's truth applied. And that's what you get in less than 2 minutes with Point of View's Viewpoints Commentary, a daily resource to help you be informed and think through the things we need to be talking about. It is free and will arrive in your inbox each day when you visit pointofview.net/signup. Sometimes we know we should say something, but we're silent because we're not quite sure what to say. Viewpoints Commentary can help you break the silence and change the narrative. It can make you a more equipped agent for truth. Get your free subscription to the Viewpoints Commentary at pointofview.net/signup. pointofview.net/signup. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is